Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you, so let's begin. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs much earlier. But when you love someone unconditionally, you make excuses for behavior that should be unacceptable. My name is Matthew, and this is the story of how my 8-year marriage crumbled and led me to find something I never knew I was missing. Scarlett and I met during our last year at the university. We had that typical college romance. We got married 2 years after graduation. The first 5 years were what I'd call normal married life. We got a small house, adopted a golden retriever we named Cooper, and fell into comfortable routines. Scarlett was ambitious at her work, sometimes staying late for one reason or another. I supported her drive, even when it meant eating dinner alone most weeknights. I told myself this was temporary, that once she established herself, we'd have more couple time. But somewhere around year 6, I started noticing changes that couldn't be explained by work stress. Our intimacy, which used to happen 2 or 3 times a week, dropped to maybe once a month. When I tried to initiate, Scarlett would claim she was exhausted or had an early morning. She'd scroll through her phone during our conversations, giving me half-hearted responses when I'd ask about her day. Despite all these red flags, I convinced myself this was just a rough patch. Every marriage has them, right? I started doing more around the house, planning surprise date nights, and buying her favorite flowers. Instead of appreciating these gestures, Scarlett seemed to downplay them. She'd make comments like, "You don't need to try so hard," or "What do you want this time?" At the time, I thought she was being funny. Now I realize she was taking my devotion for granted. The real warning bells started when, during arguments, Scarlett began making offhand comments about feeling stuck in a routine, and how she was missing out on experiences. When I suggested we could travel more or try new activities together, she didn't outrightly dismiss these ideas, but at the same time, she never accepts them. Her work schedule became even more erratic. 3 or 4 nights a week, she wouldn't come home until after 10 p.m., claiming client dinners or team bonding events. On weekends, she'd disappear for hours without any reasonable excuses. When I'd call or text during these absences, she'd either not respond or give short, irritated replies. I started questioning myself constantly. Was I being too clingy? Not giving her enough space?
Idée, analyse et vraie interaction. Trying to figure out what idée done wrong.
The breaking point came on one Thursday evening. Scarlett walked into our kitchen, where I was making dinner, and announced that she wasn't sure she wanted to stay married. She said she felt like she wasn't getting the best out of life by being married and needed to live her life to the fullest without the shackles of marriage.
My world tilted.
Instead of questioning her line of thought, I asked what I could do to make her happier in our marriage. I was in love with this woman. That response probably sealed my fate. Scarlett saw my desperation and began treating our relationship like a negotiation where she held all the cards. She started coming home even later, sometimes not until 1 or 2 in the morning. When I expressed concern, she'd remind me that she wanted a divorce. The emotional distance became a physical one too. Still, I couldn't bring myself to give up. I suggested marriage counseling, romantic getaways, and even taking a break from work to focus on us. Scarlett would listen to these proposals with barely concealed impatience, like I was missing some obvious truth she couldn't spell out for me. The truth, I now realize, was that she'd already emotionally checked out of our marriage and was probably already involved with someone else. About a month after her initial bombshell, I tried to get her to reconsider her initial proposal. Scarlett explained that she'd been doing research on modern relationships. She claimed that traditional monogamy was outdated and that many successful couples were exploring open arrangements. She presented this as if she'd discovered some revolutionary concept, rather than admitting she wanted permission to sleep with other people. My gut reaction was immediate revulsion. This wasn't what I'd signed up for when we promised to forsake all others. But Scarlett framed it as our chance to reignite the excitement in our relationship instead of a divorce. She said we could set boundaries and that experiencing other people might make us appreciate each other more. She had statistics about how open marriages could strengthen bonds and articles from lifestyle magazines about couples who'd saved their relationships this way. I told her no. She said she'd been hoping I'd be more evolved in my thinking. Over the next few days, she'd drop hints about how other people had arrangements that worked well, though she'd never mentioned this before. After a week of this pressure campaign, Scarlett gave me an ultimatum. She said she'd already wasted too much time being unfulfilled and couldn't wait any longer for me to get on board. It was open marriage or divorce. She gave me exactly those two options, presenting them like equally reasonable choices rather than the relationship-ending scenarios they both represented. I still couldn't bring myself to choose immediately. Something about the way Scarlett had approached this whole situation felt calculated rather than spontaneous. I suspected that she'd already have someone outside and was working backward to get permission. While I wrestled with this impossible decision, Scarlett's behavior became even more brazen. She started staying out entire nights, and when I questioned her, she got furious, accusing me of stalking her and letting me know that I don't own her. The emotional manipulation was constant. After a while in this nightmare, I made a decision that probably saved my sanity. I joined the gym closest to my office, figuring that physical exercise might help me process the emotional chaos. I'd never been much of a gym person, but I needed somewhere to channel the anxiety and anger I was feeling. I started going every day after work, staying for an hour or two, partly to improve my health and partly to delay going home to Scarlett's increasingly erratic behavior. It was brutal. I was out of shape, self-conscious, and still mentally spinning about my marriage situation. I was expecting Scarlett to give me the divorce papers any day, but funny enough, it didn't come. But gradually, the gym routine began helping. It was during my third week at the gym that I first really talked to another gym regular, Amanda. She was a few years younger than me, with an easy smile. I'd seen her around. She seemed to know everyone, was always encouraging other members, clearly a regular who'd been coming there for a while. Our first real conversation happened when she approached and offered some tips like someone who genuinely wanted to help. We talked for maybe 10 minutes about workout routines and stress management. Over the next several weeks, these casual conversations became the highlight of my gym visits. She'd remember details from previous conversations and follow up on things I'd mentioned. It sounds simple, but after months of Scarlett treating me like background noise in her life, having someone show genuine interest in my thoughts and experiences was incredibly refreshing. I was careful not to dump my marriage problems on Amanda initially. She knew I was married because I told her, but I kept our conversations light. Still, she seemed to pick up on the fact that something was bothering me. The contrast with my home life became impossible to ignore.
I barely talk to Scarlett anymore.
She hardly looked up from her phone when I walked in the door, while Amanda would break into a smile when she saw me at the gym. Scarlett acted like my presence was an inconvenience, while Amanda seemed genuinely happy to spend time talking with me. I wasn't looking for anything romantic. At that point, I was still trying to figure out how to save my marriage, despite the open relationship thing hanging over everything. But Amanda's friendship began filling an emotional void I hadn't even realized existed. For the first time in months, I looked forward to something in my day. After about a month of these gym conversations, I sort of bonded with Amanda after she gently asked if everything was okay at home, and I found myself telling her about my marriage woes and my confusion about what I should do. Amanda listened without judgment, asking clarifying questions but not offering immediate advice. When I finished explaining the situation, she was quiet for a moment before saying that it sounded like I was in an impossible position, trying to save something that the other person had already decided to end. She said it seemed like Scarlett was asking me to accept blame for her unhappiness while giving her permission to act on feelings she'd already developed for someone else. Hearing it articulated so clearly by someone outside the situation was both validating and terrifying. Amanda wasn't telling me what to do, but her perspective helped me see that I'd been so focused on keeping Scarlett happy that I'd completely ignored my own needs and boundaries. She pointed out that healthy relationships require both people to want to make things work, and it sounded like Scarlett had already emotionally moved on. These conversations with Amanda began shifting something in my mindset. For months, I'd been operating from a position of desperation, trying to convince Scarlett to stay, to choose me, to value our marriage. But talking with Amanda reminded me that I had value too, that my feelings mattered, that I deserved to be with someone who actually wanted to be with me. The changes in my attitude became apparent at home. I stopped begging Scarlett to spend time together or explain her late nights. I started making plans without checking with her first. Instead of trying to engage her attention in things, I just go ahead and do it. I was still living in the same house, but I began emotionally detaching from the relationship. Scarlett noticed these changes almost immediately. She'd always been able to control my mood with her approval or disapproval, but suddenly I wasn't seeking her validation. I was dressing better, seemed more confident, and was less available for her emotional manipulation. Instead of appreciating this improvement, She became suspicious and irritated. She started questioning where I went after work, why I was coming home later, and who I was texting when my phone buzzed. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd been staying out all night and demanding an open marriage was now acting jealous and possessive. When I'd mentioned going to the gym or grabbing coffee with a friend, she'd grill me for details about who I was with and what we talked about. One evening, Scarlett confronted me directly. She said I was acting different, and demanded to know if I was having an affair. I almost laughed at the accusation, considering she was the one who'd been pushing for an open marriage. I told her I'd made efforts in taking care of myself instead of obsessing over our failing marriage. This answer clearly wasn't what she expected. Scarlett had grown accustomed to my devoted attention, my willingness to prioritize her needs over my own, my desperation to keep our relationship intact. Now that I was building a life and relationships outside of our marriage, she was losing the control she'd taken for granted. The situation reached a breaking point weeks later. I came home from coffee with Amanda to find Scarlett waiting in our living room, looking agitated. She immediately started accusing me of getting too close to someone and emotionally cheating on our marriage. She demanded to know who I'd been spending time with and whether I was having inappropriate relationships while she was waiting for me at home. The hypocrisy was staggering. This was the same woman who'd been staying out all night, who demanded an open marriage, who'd given me an ultimatum about accepting her need to explore other relationships. But now that I was developing meaningful connections outside our marriage, suddenly I was the one crossing boundaries. I realized in that moment that Scarlett had never intended for the open marriage to be truly open. She wanted permission to pursue other relationships while keeping me as her loyal, devoted backup plan. She assumed I'd wait patiently at home while she explored her options, available for emotional support and financial stability whenever she needed me. That night, I made my decision. I told Scarlett that I was done trying to save our marriage and would be filing for divorce. I said I'd spent months trying to meet her impossible demands and accommodate her need to explore other relationships, but I was no longer willing to accept the disrespect and emotional manipulation. I still remember Scarlett's reaction when I told her that I was thinking we should end the marriage. She started crying, accusing me of being a cheat and never loving her. She claimed I tricked her into not proceeding with a divorce, and now I want one. She said she loved me, and that's the reason she never left since. But it was too late. Through my friendship with Amanda, I'd remembered what it felt like to be valued, respected, and genuinely cared for. I'd tasted an authentic connection with someone who saw me as a priority rather than an inconvenience. I couldn't go back to begging for scraps of attention from someone who'd made it clear she found me insufficient. Over the following weeks, as I consulted with divorce lawyers and started the legal process, I learned more about what Scarlett had been doing during our marriage crisis. Her friend opened up to me about how she was seeing a guy I know. My wife and her lover had reconnected at a friend's wedding and had been carrying on a physical affair for a while before Scarlett ever mentioned opening our marriage. It made sense that Scarlett's request for open relationships was her attempt to retroactively get permission for cheating she was already doing. It was about avoiding guilt while continuing an affair that had already begun. But Scarlett soon realized that her backup plan wasn't going to become her primary relationship because the guy wasn't serious with her. She panicked and tried to return to the safety of our marriage. But by then, my relationship with Amanda had evolved beyond friendship. Amanda knew my situation was complicated and never pressured me to move faster than I was comfortable with. She understood that I was going through a divorce and needed time to process the end of my marriage. But she also made it clear that she cared about me and was willing to see where our relationship could go once I was free from the chaos my wife had created. The divorce proceedings were messy, as I'd expected. Scarlett contested everything, despite having been the one to threaten divorce first. She demanded alimony, half our assets, and even tried to claim that my relationship with Amanda constituted adultery, though she couldn't explain how that was different from her own affair. Her lawyers tried to paint me as an unfaithful husband who'd abandoned his marriage for another woman. But the timeline didn't support their narrative. I had months of documentation showing how I have been unhappy for years. My relationship with Amanda had developed after Scarlett had already declared our marriage over and demanded permission to see other people. The most difficult part of the divorce wasn't the legal battles or financial negotiations. It was watching Scarlett's growing bitterness and desperation. She'd alternate between making me feel guilty and attacking me for throwing away our marriage for some gym bunny. She'd even contact my family to try to get them to convince me to come back. But I'd made my choice. I'd spent years accepting less than I deserved, making excuses for someone who didn't value what we had together. Scarlett's actions hadn't created problems in our marriage. They'd revealed problems that had been building for years. Her affair and demand for an open relationship weren't the cause of our divorce. They were symptoms of deeper issues that we'd never properly addressed. The divorce was finalized almost a full year after it began. The financial settlement was fair. We split our assets. Scarlett got alimony for 3 years to help her establish financial independence, and we agreed to sell the house and divide the proceeds. Through it all, Amanda remained patient and supportive without trying to insert herself into the legal drama. She understood that ending a marriage, even a failed one, requires time to grieve and process. She gave me space when I needed it and companionship when I was ready for it. I'm not saying my marriage to Scarlett was doomed from the start, but I now understand that it became unsustainable the moment one person decided their individual desires mattered more than our partnership. Scarlett's demand for an open marriage wasn't about improving our relationship. It was about avoiding responsibility for her choices while maintaining the security our marriage provided. Looking back, I wish I'd recognized earlier that unconditional love doesn't mean accepting unlimited disrespect. I wish I'd understood that trying harder to please someone who doesn't value your efforts is like pouring water into a bucket with holes in the bottom. You'll exhaust yourself without ever filling it up. The biggest lesson I've learned is that healthy relationships require two people who both choose, every day, to prioritize their partnership. When one person checks out emotionally while demanding that the other person fight for the relationship alone, that's not a temporary rough patch, that's the end. Amanda didn't save me from my marriage. She simply reminded me what it felt like to be appreciated for who I am rather than criticized for who I'm not. The connection we built gave me the strength to choose self-respect over false hope, authentic love over comfortable familiarity. Scarlett texts me occasionally. She still seems to believe that our divorce was an impulsive mistake rather than the inevitable result of her choices. She's never taken responsibility for the affairs, the ultimatums, or the emotional manipulation that characterized our final years together. I don't respond to these messages, not out of anger, but because I've moved forward. I'm with someone who values honesty over manipulation, who sees our relationship as something to nurture rather than something to leverage. I'm building a life based on mutual respect rather than desperate attempts to earn someone's affection. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stood up to Scarlett earlier, if I demanded respect instead of accepting her threats and ultimatums. Maybe we could have worked through our problems if I'd shown more backbone when she first started testing our boundaries. But honestly, I think Scarlett had already decided our marriage wasn't enough for her, and no amount of effort on my part would have changed that fundamental incompatibility. The irony is that Scarlett got exactly what she said she wanted: freedom to explore other relationships and discover what else was out there. She just assumed I'd wait patiently for her to finish exploring and come back when she was ready. She never considered that I might also discover something better, something that made me realize what I'd been missing all along. I'm grateful now for Amanda's friendship that became something more, but I'm even more grateful for what that relationship taught me about my own worth. I deserve someone who chooses me enthusiastically, not someone who treats me like a consolation prize. I deserve a partnership built on mutual commitment, not one-sided devotion to someone who's already got one foot out the door. If you're in a similar situation, dealing with ultimatums or threats or demands to accept disrespect in the name of love, please understand that real love doesn't require you to compromise your dignity. Real love doesn't demand that you accept behavior that makes you feel worthless. And real love definitely doesn't ask you to compete with other people for someone's basic commitment and respect.
Take care of yourself first.
Build a life you're proud of, with or without your current partner. Develop friendships and interests that fulfill you independently of your romantic relationship. And remember that staying in a marriage isn't automatically better than leaving one, especially when staying requires you to accept treatment that erodes your self-worth. I'm happier now than I've been in years, not because my life is perfect, but because I'm finally with someone who sees being with me as a privilege rather than a burden. That's what everyone deserves, and it's definitely what you deserve too.